Hello everyone. Welcome back to our next topic, which is the forensic nanotechnology in fingerprint examination. I am Sthiti Kansal, a volunteer at Applied Forensic Research Sciences and your host for the session. Let's begin. In this presentation, we are going to talk about the technique of forensic nanotechnology and how it's useful in the fingerprint examinations. Then we'll look at different types of fingerprints and clear our basics on the traditional methods that are used for the fingerprint analysis. Then we'll study the different nanomaterials along with the mechanisms with which they are used in fingerprint detection. Then we'll look at some examples of cases that can be solved through the use of nanotechnology in fingerprinting. After that, we'll look onto some of the major advantages of nanotechnology in fingerprint detection, keeping in mind the challenges, scope, and legal considerations in this field. Finally, at last, we'll conclude our presentation with some references. So let's move on to our first topic, that is the introduction. First, we are going to discuss what is nanotechnology. It is made from a word derived from Greek language that means tiny scale, and we all know that a nanometer measures around 10 to the power minus 9 meters. It is basically the technique of using nanoparticles to solve any issue or prove any theory. And when we use these nanoparticles and techniques to solve the legal cases related to crimes, then it comes under the forensic nanotechnology. It is basically examining the evidences at the molecular level to solve the crimes. It is currently very trending in forensic science because it can be used to detect and examine the fingerprints with a great percentage of accuracy as well as sensitivity. Before going deeper into the world of forensic nanotechnology, first we'll be looking at the different types of fingerprints present in the forensics. I hope you all must be knowing this already that there are three major types of fingerprints present at the crime scene. They are the latent fingerprints or the hidden fingerprints, which are invisible to the naked eye and are formed from the sweat and oil that is released from the sebaceous glands of the skin. Then we have the patent fingerprints or the visible ones, which are formed from any colored substance like blood, ink, or even dirt. And the last we have are the plastic fingerprints that are the three-dimensional in structure and are formed from materials like clay, wax, or paint, and usually on the soft materials. Now we'll be talking about the traditional methods that are currently being used to detect, collect, and analyze the fingerprints from the crime scene. The first one is the powder method, which is the most simple and most commonly used method to develop the latent fingerprints. Some fine particulate size powders of various colors combined with binders that adhere to the sebaceous content of the fingerprints are used to visualize the fingerprints. They are very cost effective and non-toxic in nature. Then we have the chemical methods where chemicals like cyanoacrylate, iodine, etc. are used to bind to the sebaceous content at specific temperature conditions to reveal the fingerprints. And the last method that is very popular these days is the automated fingerprint identification system or the AFIS, which is a type of digital system comprising of a database of all the known fingerprint records to quickly search, compare, and identify the unknown fingerprints. This system is very quick and 100% reliable. Although these methods have so much advantages, still there are some limitations to these traditional methods, such as the variation in the material where the fingerprint is found, since these powder methods can only be used for specific type of surfaces. Also, the environmental factors or any accidental factors like injury can degrade the fingerprints, thus making it impossible for the AFIS to detect these. Thus, we need a new approach to the field of fingerprinting that can be met by combining it with the nanotechnology. As we discussed in the starting, nanotechnology is a technique of manipulation of particles at the molecular level. Thus, it can allow us to interact precisely with the smallest present components of the fingerprint or even its residues. It will also enhance the sensitivity as well as the specificity of the results, and we'll be able to get more accurate and fast results. Now, there are mainly three types of nanoparticles that are used in the field of nanotechnology. First one being the gold nanoparticles. We all know that the gold is very malleable and its atom has enough amount of space, thus it is used as a nanoparticle that attaches to the fingerprint residue and also provide the high contrast images under specific lighting conditions. The next particle we have is the quantum dot particle. These are the fluorescent semiconductors which glow under UV light, thus highlighting the intricate fingerprint details. And the last one is the cylindrical nanotubes that are made from carbon material which have the property of adhering to the oils and sweat residues present in the fingerprint. Then they improve the detection on different surfaces. Since we already studied about the types of nanoparticles in the previous slide, it will be very easy for us to understand their mechanisms now. The gold particles that we studied have the property to chemically bind to the sweat residues present in the fingerprint, thus creating a visible impression for us. The next type we studied was the quantum dots that, as I explained you earlier, have the fluorescent properties as they emit light when excited by UV radiation, making the fingerprint glow and visible. The last type of phenomenon is the electrical conductivity shown by the carbon nanotubes, enhancing the electrical properties of the fingerprint and adhering to the oil residue present on them, making them visible for us. Now, let us move on to the examples of some case studies and see how forensic nanotechnology in fingerprinting can be used to solve these cases. Our first case study is about a burglary occurred in a residential area where the suspect only left behind the latent fingerprints on a porous surface, that was the paper. Here, the traditional methods failed because of the porous nature of the paper. So, gold particles were used to create a visible pattern as they adhered to the fingerprint residue, and then they were easily matched to the suspect, leading to his arrest. The next case study is about a murderer where a weapon was recovered and it had fingerprints on it, but the traditional methods were unable to detect them due to the metal's smooth texture. Finally, carbon nanotubes were applied to the metal surface that, due to their electrical conductivity, adhered to the sweat residues, and thus fingerprints were matched and suspect was arrested. Moving on further, we have our next case study, which is a case of robbery where the fingerprints of the thief was found on the window glass, but here also the traditional methods were not effective enough because of the glass transparency. So here we use the quantum dots that have the property of fluorescence when they are exposed to UV light. Thus, they glowed and highlighted the fingerprint patterns, and then the forensic experts were able to identify the culprit. Now, our last case study is about a cold case where degraded latent fingerprints were found on an archival evidence since it was a decade old murder case. Now, even AFIS was not able to detect those fingerprints because of their degradation, but here we use the silver nanoparticles as they enhance the degraded prints, and then finally the experts were able to match them to a suspect. So this is how the new technological methods are very helpful in the cases of fingerprint examination. Getting ahead, now let's discuss some advantages of the nanotechnology in this field. You all must have already seen that it is a very sensitive technique as the nanoparticles are very small in size and hence they can even detect very faint and partial fingerprints too. They can also provide much clearer and detailed images of the fingerprint patterns like the minutiae and the ridges. Also, they are very versatile as they prove effective on various surfaces, including that of wet and porous surfaces. So, the technique is indeed very advantageous in this field. As we always say that everything in the world has its own advantage as well as disadvantage, so there are some challenges to this technology also. Like as I've mentioned that this is an expensive technique. Also, it has limited accessibility to all the parts of the country, and there is a lack of the standardized protocols, which is a great challenge in this field. To overcome these challenges, we should do continuous research to develop new, cost effective, better, and faster methods to improve the fingerprint detection while keeping in mind the legal considerations to the field. So, overall, in this presentation, we studied the technique of forensic nanotechnology and how it is very popular in the fingerprint analysis these days, offering numerous advantages over the traditional techniques. I hope this topic is now very clear to you. Here is the list of some references where you can study this topic in detail if you want. See you next time. Thank you so much.